Good morning. Welcome to the Housing Digital Micro Conference, looking at how data can be harnessed to improve the resident experience. My name's Joe Brune. I'm the Managing Director of Housing Digital, and I'm today's host and chair of this online event, where we discover how data-driven insights can transform the way social housing providers understand and meet resident needs. We'll discuss innovative approaches to collecting and analysing data from tenant feedback to service usage patterns and how this information can drive improvements in maintenance, communication, and community engagement. We'll discover how leveraging data can create a more responsive and resident-focused approach in social housing, particularly pertinent since the recent government announcement of a resident experience fund of £1 million to be allocated for projects. So I would like to introduce our first speaker today, Ian Bobbett, Chief Data Officer at Crimson. Crimson are kindly sponsoring today's session. Ian, you're free to share your screen.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. Great to see you all. As mentioned, I'm Ian Bobbett, Chief Data Officer at Crimson. I'm here to talk about how data can improve the resident experience. I suppose what I'd like to start with is perhaps a note that I don't really know people's data backgrounds, data knowledge, those kind of things. So I'll start with the basics and go through fairly quickly. Obviously, feel free to ask me questions at the end. But I suppose one thing that I would like to start with is what do we mean by data? Traditionally, data would be very much rows and columns of information, which we now call structured data. You'll be familiar with that with Microsoft Excel or your Microsoft PowerPoint or other reporting platforms. But time and technology has moved on very quickly in the last few years, and we now look at data much more holistically. For example, we look at text and images and audio recordings, information such as geospatial data. We look at all of these bits of information much more widely, and all of them are considered, I suppose, inputs to data and AI solutions, which doesn't really help most people understand what is meant by data. So I suppose in a nutshell, what I think people should kind of think of as data, and I'll use the term quite a lot, data or information, I'll use them interchangeably, is rather than worrying about data sources or anything like that, what you should look at is any digital information that your organization stores and holds. And because we've got new data, it's opened a lot of new doors. You will have all be familiar with ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, and similar tools. They all very much are driven by data. We'll come on to that in a few moments. So there's an increasing relevance to these different types of data in the world that we now live in. What you mostly see in organizations is a lot of different systems, and within those systems that they create a lot of information, a lot of data. So what typically happens in your organization, you might have a call center agent that is accessing a telephony system. They might also access a CRM system while they're doing their jobs. Elsewhere, there might be a case management system within the organization, a whole myriad of other different places where data is kept. And that served us really well for a very, very long time. But increasingly, you see organizations working really hard to collate all of that information into one place, which more traditionally will be referred to as a database, but in our days, more realistically, it's a data platform that can manage the various types of data that's available to a business. And those modern data platforms serve a number of really key purposes. The first one is it creates a single version of the truth. I don't know if many organizations that are here today recognize this, but often you might get two conflicting pieces of information and it becomes really difficult to make a decision. But having one version of the truth that a business operates on tends to lead to a lot of, I suppose, halo benefits. Perhaps even more so, though, is that it gives a 360-degree view of your business. When you think about the silos I just described a few moments ago, it's great to look at your telephony system and understand how your call center is performing. But if you want to understand the end outcome of what that means for a resident, that may not be within your telephony system. So that's why having that 360-degree, that holistic view, means you can solve bigger business challenges and automate tasks that perhaps are lower value and let your colleagues focus on higher value activities. AI has changed this a little bit. AI doesn't care as much where data comes from. So you get two complementary ways of working with the data and information in your system, in your business rather. That all obviously needs to be underpinned by good security, good governance, and increasingly good ethics. So making sure that you use your data in the right way, it's safe and protected, and it's only used for the necessary and agreed use, and can't be accessed by anyone, is really, really critical. What can we use data for? Well, at its simplest, what we want to use data for is to positively impact stakeholders. So if I know this is a very gross simplification, but if I look at housing associations, for example, what do we want to do with tenants? Well, we want them to have a positive and low friction experience with the housing association. Colleagues, we want to perhaps remove mundane tasks that often they get caught up in, and instead let them carry out higher value tasks. So automation kind of comes into our thinking a lot. And from an organization perspective, we want to run more effectively with the staffing levels that we currently have. So we want to offer a better service to tenants. We want to have a better tenant satisfaction, but that goes the same for colleagues as well. So organizations have kind of multiple levers that they want to pull in this. So we can do that across different levels within the business. We can leverage data to give us really tactical solutions, such as perhaps a piece of AI that looks at damp and mold photos and assesses how severe the problem is. Or we can have quite strategic or holistic solutions, such as if you want to understand how your repair journey works from an end-to-end perspective, and understand what bits of that repair journey can be automated, how you can predict whether you need to make a significant repair. You can help your business make really important decisions much more effectively and much more efficiently when you have the data to allow you to do so. A really quick example, which is relevant for some of the housing associations that Crimson's speaking to. This is an imaginary scenario, by the way, but no access visits are a fairly common problem within housing associations. In this instance, we've got about a 35% no access appointment. So that means someone has turned up to the front door, but can't get in to do what they were tasked with doing there. What we would do from a data and AI perspective is we want to understand the common characteristics of no access visits. Are there certain profiles of tenants where the time of day won't work? So for example, if it's a family, don't go during the time when they might be taking their kids to school. But trying to understand what features and behaviours might lead up to a no access visit, but also we want to understand if they escalate. We want to understand if they escalate both from I suppose a metrics perspective in terms of complaints, etc. But also if people complain, it means that they wanted the visit. If people don't complain, it means they didn't want the visit. So it might be in arrears, for example, and might be nervous about a housing association making a visit. So that information helps us understand circumstance, and circumstance helps us understand what decisions we need to make. We might also look at it from an internal perspective. So are there colleagues that can potentially do multiple tasks in one visit? So if different types of visit have a different type of access rate, we might be able to put either multiple colleagues or colleagues that can carry out multiple disciplines. And all of that leads us to being able to predict the likelihood of a successful access on a visit, and therefore prioritizing what we need to do. So, for example, if we've got a low chance of access, we might want to do a much more preloading in our communications beforehand, with the ultimate goal of optimizing our access. So we want to minimize that no access visit. Just really quickly, for a housing association that has a 35% of appointments resulting in no access, at an average of about £65 per missed appointment, that's about £1 million per year that's spent on missed appointments. Data quality is really, really important. I appreciate this is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I've created a very simple image using Microsoft Copilot, and the prompt was create an image of a UK social housing block of flats. A small tweak of that can have quite profound impacts. So create an image of a modern UK social housing block of flats with surrounding amenities gives us a really different picture. I appreciate that this is, to a degree, somewhat irrelevant, but one thing I'd really like people to walk away with today is that it's really important to get data right and having your foundations really solid, because all business decisions tend to be powered by data, and certainly all AI, machine learning solutions and automations are definitely powered by data. In the world of AI, we're at a point where data quality is absolutely critical. In the database world, there's long been a mantra of garbage in, garbage out. That is more relevant today than it has ever been. And what that means is if you put poor quality into an AI, machine learning, data solution, what you'll get out is a poor outcome. At the moment, a lot of the sectors that we work in, it's very tempting to look at data as a compliance metric. And probably the other really big takeout I'd like people to have from today is that data is absolutely not a compliance metric. It is data quality is a value opportunity. All of your future AI, automation, machine learning solutions will be built off data. All of your decision making is already built off data. So organizations want to bring new ideas, new efficiencies, better experiences to their tenants. And data is a key component in enabling that. And again, just to reiterate, that's data and information. It sounds really expensive to do this, and it used to be really expensive. What used to happen in the past is people would build what we call monolithic data platforms. It would take years to implement. And by the time you kind of get to your shiny new data platform, what you'd often find is you didn't remember what you're doing it for in the first place, or times have moved on. At Crimson, we're really focused on having frameworks that enable us to deliver value quickly. And just across the bottom there, really quickly, what we do is we look at your current capability and where you want to get to. We help you then develop use cases and prioritize those use cases based on value and feasibility. So already our focus is on a return of value. Value isn't necessarily financial, by the way. Value might be improved tenant metrics, tenant satisfaction, better outcomes from your colleague staff survey. but there has to be a value goal in doing something. Then making sure you build those brilliant foundations, making sure you've got good data quality, strong governance, and then taking that proof of concept to roll out to iterate approach. So build a solution that you can implement quickly, test and validate, make sure it's compliant, deploy it out into the business. When you deploy it out in the business, understand that these solutions only ever go wrong when it's not communicated to colleagues. So we do a lot of work around enabling, training, adoption, and embedding, and then iterate through to your next use case. So you've kind of got that constant cycle of value add where you're not building a huge data platform, instead you're building specific data assets that can then drive your business forwards. If you'd like to find out a bit more, Crimson is holding its annual innovation conference in November 2025. I've got a colleague on the call who will put a link in the chat if you'd like to register. So please feel free to book. I believe it's free, so feel free to come along and see us in person. And with no further ado, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. Very much appreciated. A whistle-stop tour there. Following that presentation, which was really insightful and certainly gave me an insight into some of the work that Crimson are doing, I see we've got some questions.
Hi, it's Mark Antrell, editor of Housing Digital. It's a bit of a twofold question, really. Just listening to that. I mean, one, I was like thinking, how do you deal with possible reservations from tenants about all the information that's gathered and stored? Personal qualms about the data that's held and what might be done with it. And secondly, I was just listening when you said about all the efficiencies it can generate by analysing the data. How does an organisation safeguard against I don't know, possible clash of efficiency? So the data saying if the business does this, we'll get a lot of efficiency squeezed out of it from our business operations, but it might impact tenants in a way they're not quite comfortable with. So how would you safeguard and balance that, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So in terms of the data that you're using for tenants, there are a lot of regulations and guidelines that limit what we can do. The biggest rule I would always say is be completely transparent. Make sure that your tenants understand their rights, their data rights. So perhaps have really clear on your website, or even maybe perhaps less digital communication that allows tenants to have visibility, know their rights, and know how they can understand what it's being used for, and also change those permissions. Because under UK legislation, there are plenty of protections to make sure that data is being used correctly. I'd also urge housing associations to put in common sense. If you don't want it to happen to you, don't let it happen. In terms of the efficiencies and safeguarding, that's why you do proof of concepts. So not all solutions work, just to be completely transparent. There will be a lot of reasons why perhaps something that looks really good in data may need tweaking in the real world. But when you work collaboratively with subject matter experts, you tend to be really effective at overcoming those challenges.
Thank you for your question, Mark. We've got a comment from Allcock Chowdhury in the chat. So it says he thinks it's twofold. How and what data is captured? How do you fix the existing data so it's useful?
That is a tricky one. A lot of housing associations will face areas where they've got really good data and areas where they haven't got good data. The way I've approached it in the past is use the good data, identify where the bad data is, and work iteratively to continue to improve your data quality. Bear in mind, under UK legislation, we have an obligation to have up-to-date and accurate data about our tenants. That is clearly stated as a core principle in the GDPR legislation. So data quality is really important, as well as the governance and other areas.
Yeah. Have we got another question?
Hi there, Kat Gedney from Extra Care Charitable Trust. I just wanted to kind of pick up on that last point as well and say about kind of how do you fix the existing data? So typically we find it's from kind of poor process. So for me, the advice to kind of fixing poor data is to look at existing processes and see where it's falling down. So for example, kind of asset management, asset life cycle things. Are we updating where we've replaced an asset so that we now know it's got a new warranty period and continuing that, or do we still think that that old asset with whatever its serial number was is still in place? So that's the sort of intelligence that you can have quite easily if you just sort out processes.
Yeah. So I normally start with the data audit when I'm facing these kind of situations, and that is looking at where the data is good, where there's gaps, where it's poor quality. Looking at then the process as to how that data comes to be is obviously really important. But my experience has been you have to create a value exchange for the people on the ground. When I've seen data quality really improve, like very steeply, it has in some way made the people who put the data in's life better. So it might be that they've got, they're commissioned perhaps, so more the commercial world, but commissioned on data quality, or it impacts their performance bonus, or, the best one, to be honest, is your life is now easier. So you understand that if you put data quality in, your life will be easier because you can do things faster, but also you can put in detection methods that help you understand when data goes in that's not of adequate quality, so they've got to do it again. So carrot and stick a little bit. I don't really like the stick, if I'm honest. Creating that value exchange is the most important thing.
Excellent. Thank you, Ian. Okay. Just to summarize what we've heard today, we heard from Ian at Crimson, who is the Chief Data Officer, and he got the ball rolling by explaining what we actually mean by data. Time and technology has moved on, so it's not just structured data in the columns and rows of Excel spreadsheets. Nowadays, it can include text, audio, geospatial information, and more. In a nutshell, data is any information an organization gathers and stores. As he explained, increasingly the sector is working to collate this data into one platform to provide a single version of the truth. He explained how this becomes a powerful means to analyze the business and target benefits for stakeholders. As he pointed out, data quality is vital, as is security and governance. We then had Steve Allcock, who's the Group Business Transformation Director at Riverside, who presented a real-life case study to explain how they are using data to reform its services. Brilliant at the basics, not just about innovation for innovation's sake. He explained but also delivering a consistent and emphatic approach based around residents and informed by quality data. The approach is about building services based on real experience and expectation, not assumptions. It's a systematic approach that is based on resident needs rather than those of the organisation. We've then just had Will Walker, Director of Transformation at Citizen, who explained the process and reasoning Citizen applied to modernise its services and integrate its systems and teams following the merger. The journey didn't begin with data, but it became a much more important factor as they moved forward. The approach was founded on a set of values and purposes. Then when Will went on to focus on 4 key elements: technology, people, processes, and culture, with data coming to the fore as the journey progressed. The purpose is to place residents at the forefront of the business and enable teams to work together to provide the experience residents expected. And then finally, just wanted to say thank you to Crimson, who are one of our stakeholder partners, and for sponsoring today's micro conference. And also just a reminder of Crimson's conference taking place on the 13th of November, and the link to that is in the chat. Other than that, it's big thank you to today's presenters. Thank you to all that attended. and we hope to see you at a future Housing Digital Micro Conference. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.